It was almost funny, the way the judge's gavel slammed down like thunder over lives that had already been bruised by silence. And maybe it would have been funny if the stakes weren't my future, his heart, and the fragile dream of the family we dared to want. Back in 1998, I was 28 years old, freshly out of law school, wearing ambition like armor and denial like a second skin. They said the courtroom was where truth lived, but I had learned early that truth was a dangerous thing, especially if it involved another man's hand brushing yours under the defense table, or the way your chest ached when you watched him pace the hallway, lips pressed together in thought. His name was Daniel Price. He was everything I wasn't, calm where I was restless, brilliant where I was reckless, and brave in ways that made me both admire and resent him. We met as interns at the district attorney's office, two young lawyers clawing our way up a ladder that was already slick with tradition, politics, and quiet prejudice. By the spring of '98, we weren't just colleagues. We weren't just friends. We were something no one in that courthouse could ever suspect, not if we wanted to keep everything we had fought for. But Daniel had this dream, a dream bigger than our late-night whispers and hidden kisses. He wanted a child, family. He wanted us to build something together that wasn't just shadows and secrecy. And that was when Rachel stepped in. Rachel was our best friend. She'd been Daniel's classmate in undergrad, my unlikely roommate in law school, and the only person who ever made both of us feel safe enough to laugh without fear of being overheard. She was bold, brilliant, fiercely loyal, the kind of woman who would defend you in a bar fight or show up at your door at midnight with coffee and a sharp tongue when you were drowning in briefs. When Daniel told her what we wanted, she didn't flinch. She just looked between us, those green eyes sparkling with mischief, and said, "Well, boys, I guess I'm your girl." I thought it was insane. Illegal in half the states, risky in every way imaginable, and guaranteed to blow up in our faces if anyone found out. But Daniel looked at me with that steady fire in his eyes, and Rachel grinned like she'd already won the case. And suddenly I was standing on the edge of something terrifying and beautiful. We didn't know then that love was about to rewrite all the rules. The first time we sat in Rachel's apartment and talked about surrogacy, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and nervous laughter. Daniel had drawn up pages of notes. She always did, but Rachel waved them off like the lawyer she wasn't but could have been. "You think I'm going to back out?" she teased, leaning back against her couch, her legs tucked under her. "Daniel, I've watched you both suffer through the city's whispers and politics for years. If this is what you want, I'll carry that baby for you. No contracts needed." "Rachel," I said, rubbing my temples, "there are laws, there are risks. This isn't just lending someone a cup of sugar. This is a human being." Her voice softened. "And you don't think I know that?" She glanced at Daniel before meeting my eyes. "I love you both. I want you to have this." Daniel reached across the table, squeezing her hand, and I felt that familiar sting, jealousy mixed with gratitude. Because she could give him something I never could. The weeks that followed were a blur of late-night planning sessions, whispered conversations in hallways, and the constant fear of discovery. The city was merciless. We couldn't tell our colleagues. We couldn't tell our families. In 1998, being two men in love was still a risk. Adding a child into the mix? It was unthinkable. But it was also unstoppable. Daniel moved through it all with quiet certainty, drafting legal documents, finding clinics willing to bend the rules, and reassuring me when my doubts threatened to drown us both. Rachel was radiant, fearless, already dreaming of lullabies and bedtime stories. And me? I was the weak link, the one who lay awake at night wondering if we were building our lives on a fault line destined to shatter. Yet every morning, when Daniel brushed past me in the kitchen, his hand lingering on my back just long enough to remind me why we were doing this, I stayed. Because even in fear, I couldn't imagine life without him. The first real crack came at the courthouse. It was a custody case, messy and loud, involving a father who'd fought tooth and nail to keep his son away from his ex-wife. I was representing the mother, Daniel the father. On opposite sides of the same courtroom, we were supposed to be adversaries, but all I could think about was the way his tie was crooked, the way his jaw tightened when the father spoke about bloodlines and legacy. That night, after hours of arguments and cross-examinations, We ended up in the same bar we always did, Rachel between us, laughing at some joke we weren't really listening to. When she went to the bathroom, Daniel leaned close, his breath warm against my ear. "Do you ever think about it?" he whispered. My pulse stuttered. Think about what? Us. In court. On opposite sides. What happens when it's not just someone else's family at stake? What happens when it's ours? I wanted to tell him I didn't know. I wanted to tell him I was terrified. But then Rachel returned, dropping her purse onto the table, and the conversation was swallowed by noise and neon lights. Summer came, and with it, the heat of decisions we couldn't take back. The clinic appointments blurred together. The paperwork grew heavier. The world outside kept spinning, oblivious to the storm building in our quiet lives. Then came the night everything changed. It was late. The three of us sat in Daniel's apartment, empty wine glasses scattered across the coffee table. Rachel had been laughing, her cheeks flushed, but then she grew quiet, her gaze flicking between us. "You know this isn't just your dream, right?" she said softly. I frowned. "What do you mean?" Her voice trembled. "I've loved you both for years, in different ways, and I know I'm supposed to be just the vessel, just the friend. But it's not that simple anymore." Daniel froze. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Rachel's eyes glistened with tears. "If I carry this child, it won't just be yours. It'll be ours. And maybe that scares you. But it's the truth." The room went silent, broken only by the hum of the city outside. And in that silence, I realized something terrifying. Love had already changed everything. That was only the beginning. The months ahead would bring secrets we couldn't bury, choices we couldn't undo, and a courtroom battle that would force us to stand up not just for a child, but for the love we had tried so hard to keep hidden. And in the end, when the gavel fell and the truth finally broke free, none of us would ever be the same. Rachel's words hung in the air long after they were spoken, wrapping around the room like smoke you couldn't wave away. Daniel didn't move. His hand was still gripping the edge of the couch as though letting go might make everything crumble. I sat frozen, my mind running through every possible outcome, none of them good. "You love us?" I finally asked, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. Rachel gave a small, broken laugh. "Not in some fairy tale way, not like the world thinks love should look. But yes, I love you, both of you, and if I carry this child, it won't feel like I'm just a friend helping out. It'll feel like I'm a part of something I'll never be able to walk away from." Daniel exhaled, rubbing his face with both hands. His silence terrified me more than her confession. He was never silent. He always had answers. "Rachel," he said finally, his voice low, "this isn't supposed to get messy. You know what's at stake here." Her chin lifted. "You think I don't? I know better than both of you what the world will say. But you asked me to do this, and I said yes. What did you expect me to feel? Nothing." My throat tightened. I wanted to scream at both of them for dragging me into this impossible triangle, for building dreams out of sand, for making me want something that would destroy us all. But when I looked at Daniel, at the way his jaw clenched as if he were swallowing down his own heart, all I could do was sit there. The truth was, Rachel wasn't wrong. This wasn't just about biology or law or contracts. It was about love. Messy, tangled, undeniable love. The following weeks carried us forward like a river with no chance of turning back. Once the procedure was scheduled, it was as though life moved in fast motion. Doctor visits, quiet rides home, Rachel's laughter covering for our silences. And yet, something fragile had shifted between us. One evening, I found Rachel in the kitchen, staring at a glass of water she hadn't touched. Her eyes were rimmed red, though she smiled when she saw me. "You know," she said softly, "I used to imagine what it would be like to have kids. Marriage, white picket fence, the whole thing. Then I got to know you too." Her laugh was bitter, not sweet. "You ruined me for that dream, because nothing I imagined ever felt as real as sitting on this couch with you both, talking about lullabies." I didn't know what to say. I reached out, covering her hand with mine. She looked at me, eyes shimmering, and for one terrifying moment I thought she might kiss me. But she didn't. She just squeezed my hand and pulled away. Later that night, Daniel asked me what had happened in the kitchen. I told him nothing. I lied. And maybe that was the first real betrayal, not of him, but of us all. By autumn, Rachel was pregnant. The day we found out, Daniel's hands shook when he held the test, his lips parting as if he couldn't quite believe what he saw. He turned to me, eyes shining, and for the first time in months I saw the boyish hope that had once made me fall in love with him. "We're going to be fathers," he whispered. Rachel laughed through her tears, pulling us both into an embrace that felt more like a vow than a celebration. But even in that moment, even as joy surged through me, I felt the edges of fear cutting in, because we weren't ready. Not for the law, not for the world, not for the questions that would come when a woman gave birth to a child belonging to two men who couldn't even admit publicly that they loved each other. The cracks widened. At work, Daniel began volunteering for family law cases, immersing himself in legal precedents, as though knowledge could protect us. I buried myself in criminal defense, avoiding questions, avoiding colleagues who asked too much about my personal life. And Rachel began to glow in a way that terrified me. Because it wasn't just pregnancy. It was love. Real, aching, dangerous love. The breaking point came in November during Thanksgiving. Rachel invited us both to her family's dinner in Queens. Her parents were warm, welcoming, proud of their daughter. They assumed Daniel was her boyfriend and I was just the friend. We didn't correct them. At one point, her father clapped Daniel on the back and said, "You're going to be a wonderful father." Daniel froze, glancing at me across the table. For a second, I thought he'd say he'd tell the truth in front of everyone. But then Rachel reached over, touching his arm, smiling as if the lie was her favorite secret, and he stayed silent. I left the table, couldn't breathe. Rachel found me outside on the porch, the cold air biting my skin. "You think I don't see it?" she said quietly. "The way you look at him, the way you're afraid he'll choose me over you." I wanted to deny it. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, but the truth clawed its way out before I could stop it. "You're giving him something I can't, and that terrifies me." Her eyes softened, but her words were sharp. "And what if he doesn't want to choose? What if he wants both of us?" The idea lodged in my chest like glass. Both of us. A family made not of rules, but of love. But the world would never allow it. Not in 1998. Not in New York. When Daniel joined us, pulling Rachel close, kissing her temple with a tenderness that ripped me apart, I realized we weren't just defying the law anymore. We were defying the very definitions of love and family. And sooner or later, someone was going to make us pay for it. The storm broke in January. A colleague of mine, sharp-eyed and bitter, spotted Rachel leaving the courthouse after an appointment with Daniel. She was visibly pregnant by then, her coat unable to hide it. Whispers spread. Questions followed. By February, the rumors had grown claws. People said Daniel had gotten his girlfriend pregnant. They said I looked sick, distracted, jealous. They said everything except the truth. And then came the case. It was supposed to be routine custody battle, another angry father, another frightened mother. But when the opposing counsel, a man with too much ambition and too little soul, stood in front of the judge and sneered about men who think they can rewrite family law, I knew. I knew he wasn't just talking about the case. He was talking about us. Daniel's hand brushed mine under the table. Rachel sat in the back, her belly round beneath her dress, eyes wide with fear. The gavel came down. The courtroom spun. And I understood, with a clarity that burned like fire, that our love was about to be dragged into the light. That night, the three of us sat in Daniel's apartment, the city's snowstorm raging outside. None of us spoke at first. The silence was too heavy, too final. Finally, Rachel whispered, "They're going to find out, aren't they?" Daniel looked at me, then at her. His voice was steady, but his eyes betrayed him. "Yes." Her hands cradled her stomach. "And when they do, we fight," he said simply. "We fight for this child. For us." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to be as brave as he was. But all I could think of was the courthouse, the whispers, the way the world would look at us as monsters, as frauds, as sinners. And yet, when Rachel reached for my hand and Daniel's at the same time, linking us together in a fragile chain, I realized something I had been too afraid to admit. We were already a family. And families, real families, don't break. They fight, even when the whole world is against them. The snowstorm outside that night wasn't half as brutal as the storm building around us. The next morning, whispers turned into conversations, conversations into accusations. The courthouse was a cage full of sharp-eyed men and women who thrived on rumor, and we had given them a feast. By March, the questions were no longer whispered. They were pointed, direct. Whose baby is it? Why is she always here? Why are you two always together? Daniel faced it with the same calm resolve he brought to every case. He straightened his tie, kept his voice steady, and let the barbs glance off him as though he were untouchable. But I could see the cracks. I could see the exhaustion in his eyes at the end of each day. Rachel, too, bore the weight. Strangers on the subway stared at her belly. Friends who once invited her to brunch now sent polite excuses. She told us it didn't matter, that she was stronger than gossip, but when I found her crying in the bathroom one night, she didn't deny it. And me? I became a ghost in my own life. My cases suffered. My clients complained. Every time I stood in front of a jury, I wondered if they could see it written across my forehead: liar, deviant, fraud. The truth was coming for us. The official blow landed one gray Monday morning. We were called into the managing partner's office. The room was heavy with cigar smoke and judgment. "We've had complaints," he said, his voice like gravel. "Conflicts of interest, questions of conduct. A child born under questionable circumstances." Daniel spoke before I could. "My personal life does not affect my work." The partner's eyes narrowed. "When your personal life becomes a liability, it affects the firm. Do you understand?" The unspoken message was clear. Keep this quiet, or lose everything. When we walked out, Daniel's jaw was tight, his hands clenched at his sides. "They'll ruin us if we let them," he muttered. Rachel touched his arm. "Then don't let them." But I, coward that I was, could only think about the career I'd fought for, the reputation I'd bled to build. Could I really throw it all away? For love? For a child who wasn't even mine by blood? The questions haunted me. The pregnancy was no longer just a secret. It was a countdown. Every month, every doctor's visit, every moment brought us closer to a reckoning. April arrived with rain and more tension. Rachel was 6 months along, glowing and exhausted, caught between joy and fear. Daniel was tireless, drafting custody documents, planning contingencies, even preparing for the possibility that the state would challenge our arrangement. "We'll be ready," he kept saying. But no one could prepare us for what happened next. It started with a knock at Rachel's apartment door. A woman stood there, sharp suit, sharper smile. She introduced herself as an attorney representing a conservative family organization. They had concerns about Rachel's arrangement. "You understand," the woman said smoothly, "that what you're doing could be seen as unlawful, immoral, dangerous for the child. There are people who would take this case all the way to the Supreme Court if necessary." Rachel's voice didn't waver. "It's none of your business." The woman's smile was cold. "When a child is involved, it becomes everyone's business." And just like that, we weren't just fighting rumors. We were fighting the law itself. The lawsuit came in May. The papers claimed Rachel was being exploited, that Daniel and I were attempting to create a non-traditional family unit, harmful to the welfare of the unborn child. They demanded custody be preemptively decided, that the state intervene before the baby even entered the world. It was a nightmare. Headlines began to trickle in. Unusual custody case sparks debate. 2 men, 1 woman, 1 unborn child. We became the kind of story that talk shows twisted into entertainment. Rachel moved into Daniel's apartment for safety. Protesters gathered outside, holding signs that called us sinners, criminals, abominations. Every time I left for work, I felt their eyes on me, their hatred like fire on my skin. And yet, Through it all, something unshakable grew between us. At night, when the city finally quieted, Daniel would take my hand, his thumb brushing mine as if to remind me we were still real, still here. Rachel would sit across from us, her belly rising beneath her nightgown, her eyes soft with a kind of love I couldn't define. We were bound together, not just by a child but by defiance, by survival. The first day in court was brutal. The opposing counsel wasted no time painting us as reckless and immoral. Two men pretending to play house, he sneered. A woman coerced into carrying their child. This is not a family. This is a mockery. My stomach twisted. Every word was a blade, every accusation a reminder of how vulnerable we were. But then Daniel rose. His voice was steady, his arguments precise, his presence unshakable. This is not about your opinion of family, he said firmly. This is about the right of a child to be born into love. This is about freedom, not fear. Rachel testified next. She spoke with fire, her voice clear, her conviction unshaken. No one forced me. I chose this. I believe in this child. I believe in us. When she said us, she looked at both of us. And for a moment, even in that hostile courtroom, I felt the truth settle like sunlight on my skin. We were a family, whether they recognized it or not. But truth doesn't always win. Not in 1998. The judge ordered a full investigation. Psychologists, home visits, endless paperwork. Every part of our lives was dissected, scrutinized, twisted into something ugly. One night, after a particularly brutal interview where a social worker asked if we would expose the child to homosexual behavior, I broke. I snapped at Daniel. This is insane. We're going to lose everything. Maybe we should. Should what? He demanded. Give up? Pretend this never happened? Walk away from the life we built? His eyes burned into me, furious and wounded. I won't do it, Michael. I won't give up on you, on this child, on us. Rachel stood in the doorway, silent, watching us tear ourselves apart. And that was when I realized love wasn't just about holding each other through the good times. It was about standing in the fire together, even when the flames threatened to consume us. The baby was due in July. Each day brought us closer to both a miracle and a verdict. June was the hardest month of my life. Protesters outside our building grew louder. Tabloids published our names. My parents called, furious, demanding explanations. But then, in the quiet moments, there were flashes of hope. Rachel singing softly to her belly. Daniel sketching out nursery plans in the margins of legal briefs. The three of us sitting on the roof, watching the city lights, daring to dream of a future where this would all be worth it. It was a fragile dream, but it was ours. On July 14, 1998, Rachel went into labor. The city outside roared with summer heat. Inside the hospital, everything blurred: the doctors, the machines, the rush of footsteps. I held Rachel's hand as she screamed, Daniel on her other side, our grip on her like anchors in a storm. Hours later, a cry split the air. A tiny, furious, perfect cry. The nurse placed the baby in Rachel's arms first. She looked down, tears streaming, whispering words only the child would ever hear. Then she turned, placing the baby in Daniel's arms. He looked at me, and I saw a future we had fought for, fragile but alive. Our son, he whispered. I leaned in, my hand brushing the baby's tiny fist. Our son. Rachel watched us, her face a mix of joy and sorrow, because she knew, as we all did, that the hardest fight was still ahead. Outside the hospital, the reporters waited. The lawsuit still loomed. The world still judged. But in that moment, holding the child who carried all our love, I understood something I hadn't before. They could call us sinners. They could call us criminals. They could drag us through courts and headlines and history itself. But they couldn't take this away. We were a family, and real families didn't break. They fight. They endure. And sometimes, against all odds, they win. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach, the kind that told me something had shifted, irreversibly. After the kiss, Adrian had walked me back to my apartment in silence. No grand speeches, no hurried confessions. Just the sound of our footsteps, side by side, carrying the weight of everything that had happened. When we parted, he only whispered, "Think about it. I'll wait." And that was exactly the problem. Because every time I tried to think, all I could feel was his breath on my skin, the warmth of his hand trembling against mine, the raw desperation behind that kiss. I sat at my desk, staring at the half-finished lyrics I'd promised to deliver. For once, the words didn't flow. For once, the melodies in my head weren't safe, weren't distant, weren't academic. They were Adrian. Every note was him. Every line tasted like his name. And I hated that I couldn't stop it. The studio session that afternoon was tense. Adrian avoided my eyes at first, pretending to scroll through his phone while the producer adjusted sound levels. The others seemed oblivious, chatting about tour dates, schedules, record sales. But when it was finally time to record, his gaze found me through the glass booth. The song we'd worked on me lyrics. His voice came alive in a way that almost shattered me. I thought I was drowning in silence, but you became the sound I never knew I needed. I thought I was lost in the dark, but you carried the light in your hands. His voice cracked on the second verse, and I knew why. Because the words weren't just words anymore. They were confessions neither of us had dared to make in daylight. By the time the track ended, the entire room was silent. Even the producer muttered, "Damn, that's something else." Adrian's eyes never left mine. Couldn't breathe. Things only grew more complicated from there. Rumors began to swirl. Fans speculated about Adrian's sudden shift in tone, the emotional intensity in his performances. Paparazzi shots caught him leaving coffee shops near my neighborhood. My name hadn't been dragged into it yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time. And then came the night of the live performance. A nationally televised charity concert, millions of viewers, all waiting to see Adrian sing the ballad we'd created. I stood backstage, my badge heavy around my neck, watching him pace. His manager gave last-minute notes, the kind that sounded less like encouragement and more like veiled threats. "Remember your image. No surprises. Stick to the script." Adrian only nodded, but his fists were clenched. When it was his turn, the crowd erupted. He stepped onto the stage bathed in golden light, the microphone trembling in his hand. And then he looked straight at me, not at the cameras, not at the thousands of fans screaming his name. At me. The first notes hit and I felt the world fall away. You were the lyric I wasn't brave enough to write, the melody I kept locked in silence. But now I can't hide. Every song I sing is only for you. The crowd gasped. Reporters in the front row whispered furiously, pens scribbling. His manager froze. But Adrian didn't stop. He poured everything into that performance, the longing, the ache, the confession that should have been whispered in a quiet room but instead was shouted to the entire world. By the time he reached the final chorus, tears blurred my vision. And then he dropped the microphone, stepped down from the stage, and walked toward me. Security shifted nervously, unsure what to do. The cameras followed. Adrian reached me, his chest heaving, eyes blazing. Without hesitation, he took my hand. The audience erupted in chaos. Cheers, screams, outragite all blended into a deafening roar. But all I could hear was him. All I could feel was his hand gripping mine like he'd never let go. The fallout was immediate. Headlines exploded across every media outlet. Adrian reveals secret love in shocking onstage confession. My inbox flooded with messages, half filled with congratulations, half dripping with hate. The label called me in, their faces a storm of anger and disbelief. "Do you have any idea what you've done to his career? To our brand?" I sat there, trembling, unable to answer, because the truth was I hadn't done anything. Adrian had, and he didn't regret it. When I saw him later that night, holed up in his apartment with curtains drawn, he looked exhausted but lighter. "They can say what they want," he said, pulling me close. "They can tear me apart. But at least they'll finally know the truth." I shook my head. Adrian, your career, you matter more. The simplicity of it stole my breath. The weeks that followed were brutal. Sponsors pulled out. His manager quit. Some fans turned on him with venom I'd never imagined possible. But others defended him fiercely, rallying behind his courage. And through it all, Adrian refused to back down. He gave interviews, each one more defiant than the last. Yes, I love him. Yes, I'll keep singing about him. No, I won't apologize. The industry tried to silence him, but his songs spoke louder than any smear campaign. His music climbed charts not because of the machine behind him, but because people could feel the truth in every note. And me? I stood beside him. Through the hate, through the fear, through the nights we cried ourselves to sleep wondering if we'd made a terrible mistake. But also through the mornings we woke tangled in each other's arms, realizing that, for the first time, neither of us was alone. The first tour after the scandal was terrifying. Would anyone show up? Would the arenas be half empty, filled only with people waiting to jeer? But when Adrian stepped onto that stage, the roar of the crowd nearly shattered the roof. Handmade signs filled the air. Love wins. Sing your truth. We believe in you. And as he sang, thousands of voices joined in, turning our secret into a chorus the whole world could hear. Halfway through, he paused, scanning the crowd. Then, with a soft smile, he motioned me onto the stage. I froze, shook my head, but he wouldn't take no for an answer. Trembling, I walked to him. The spotlight hit us both, bright and merciless. Adrian took my hand again, raising it high for everyone to see. The arena erupted, and in that moment, with music and love crashing over us like waves, I realized something. It didn't matter what we'd lost, because what we'd gained was stronger. Real. Ours. Years later, when people asked me how it all began, I always laughed. It started with a job I didn't want, I'd say. A gig I thought would be nothing more than words on a page. But it became the story of us. A story written in secret lyrics, stolen glances, and one impossible kiss that changed everything. And every time Adrian sang those songs, the ones born out of fear, turned into love. I knew the truth. Every melody was still directed at me. Always had been. Always would be. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.